Alright, Shalom. First, I want to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, double honors to the apostles, the elders of Great Millstone that rule well, that taught us truth, and blessings to the elect and nation Israel. This is Brother Yakao coming with another lesson, and Lord will be edifying. And today's lesson is the series that I'm doing. Every month, I'm going to do videos entitled Israelite History 101. And in the last lesson that I did, we talked about Edward of Woodstock, who was called the Black Prince, all right? And he was involved in something called the 100 Years' War. And that 100 Years' War was between the Israelites that were in France versus the Israelites that were in England. And it was all basically a war about the kingship, because there was a king that died and he never had an heir to the throne, and people contested it, and this war went on for 100 years plus, all right? And that 100 Years War, all right, gave birth to a woman called Joan of Arc. Now I'm going to prove in this lesson, this is about the 100 Years War and Joan of Arc, all right? And it's making a lot of Edomites, so-called white people, mad, because they actually believe and think that all these people in the Middle Ages were Caucasians, because they've done something called whitewashing, okay? And whitewashing is when you take black figures in history, Israelite figures in history, you know, you take their pictures down and you basically whitewash it, you know? And I'm going to show you some examples here of whitewashing, which is, the technical term is iconoclasm, which means breaker of images, all right? But I'm going to give you some examples here. So I've got a couple of pictures. So, famous composer, what's this guy? Mozart. And if you, hang on, let me try and get here. There you go. This is a good example of whitewashing. So on the left, you have Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who was born in the 1700s, a composer, very famous, and he was a so-called black man, an Israelite. Okay, and in that period of time, the black population, the Israelite population in Europe was dwindling, because in the 1300s you had something called the Black Plague or the Black Death. That plague was only killing us. It wasn't killing the white peasants that we ruled over. Okay, all right. And basically that plague lasted for 7 years, and then it wiped out half of the population, the Israelite population, so-called black population of Europe. And that was the start of whites coming back into power. Okay, and when they went back into power, this is what they did. They whitewashed the images. All right, so here you got the real Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart here, but then you've got the fake whitewash picture. Okay, and this is something that is getting them mad, but is the truth. And it will only get you mad if you have hatred in your heart for us. And we know that the Bible tells you in Ezekiel 35 verse 5 that the Edomites, so-called whites, have perpetual hatred for us. Okay, all right. So when, I mean, they're seeing all these videos on YouTube, you know, which is truth, okay, about the whitewashing of our history, and that the kings and think about it logically. In that period of time, what was the biggest institution in Europe, whether it be in Eastern Europe or Western Europe? It was the church, whether it be the Byzantine Empire or the Holy Roman Empire, where we had Roman Catholicism. Okay, what Edomite believes in God? They hardly do. They don't really believe in a God, you know. So this is another example of whitewashing. Here you have King James on the left here, as he was, but then afterwards, when he died and whites came into power, they started painting him as a white person. You see? So this is more proof. And today we're talking about Joan of Arc and the English and the 100 Years' War between the Israelites in France and the Israelites in England. All right? Okay. Now, this is the real picture of Joan of Arc. This is from a book called Beyond the Myth. And this is what she would have looked like. Okay. All right. And there you have it. And she actually did have knight's uniform and go out on the battlefield. So this is the real picture of Joan of Arc. All right. So we're going to get into it. And the elites, they know all this. So this is the reason why they've been putting blacks in films, in, middle age period pieces. Like there was one called King and Conqueror about William the Conqueror, who was also black, an Israelite. And they put a lot of black soldiers in there and whites were complaining, etc. But they've been lied to, you see. And more proof that the elites know is this. Saint Joan, all right? This was done in the Manhattan Theatre Club, which was in America, and it was played by a black woman. All right, Saint Joan. Okay, and there was a lot of backlash when this came out. Oh yeah, you're rewriting history. No, this is actual history. So the elites, they know. It's only you average peons that don't know. Okay, now we're gonna get into the 100 Years' War, and the term back then in the Middle Ages for people of dark complexion was Swarthy. Okay? And I've got it here.
Swarthy.
Swarthy. Alright? Swarthy is an adjective used to describe a person with naturally dark complexion, skin tone, or hair, often suggesting an olive, tanned, or brown coloring. No, brown coloring, not olive or tanned. Alright? Swarthy, that was the term, all right, in the Middle Ages for someone that was dark skinned. All right, Swarthy, and you're gonna hear this term a lot when we go into the 100 Years' War and the story of Joan of Arc. So I've always told you this, that when you put in Google when blacks ruled Europe, you'll see all these pictures come up. All right. Of us ruling Europe. There's videos everywhere. The Iberian Peninsula was ruled by Israelites who were into Islam. All right. And I'm not saying that we ruled righteously in this period of time. We didn't. Okay. Because we didn't have the knowledge that we have now. The true understanding of the Bible. All right. But if you put when blacks ruled Europe and you just click, you'll see all these videos. All right. Look at this one. Why is history of Europe's black rulers being hidden? So this is the reason why I'm doing this series, Israelite History 101, because many of our people don't even know that, our great history. All right. And our history was so special that they had to claim it for themselves. I mean, you only steal something of value. Now we're going to go into this 100 Years' War. All right. I want you to listen to this because this will give you a background to why the Israelites in France and the Israelites in England were fighting. Okay? And this gave birth, this 100 Years' War, on and off, gave birth to this woman called Joan of Arc. Alright? Have a listen to this.
Over a century. Kings dethroned. Villages burned. A teenage girl hearing voices, leading armies into battle. The 100 Years' War wasn't just a battle over land, it was a battle over identity. Between England and France, it became a drawn-out storm of revenge, politics, pride, and power. But here's what most people don't realize. It wasn't one long war. It was a series of wars, with long breaks, betrayals, and even temporary friendships in between. And not every fight was between knights on horseback. Some were fought with pens, whispers, and stunning acts of courage from people you'd never expect. What started as a squabble over a throne became the foundation for the rise of modern nations. In this episode, we'll explore how this war really began, the myths we've been told, and the hidden truths buried beneath the banners. Because behind every battlefield was a story few dared to tell. A king without a crown. How it all began. The 100 Years' War didn't start on a battlefield. It began with a family feud and the death of a king. In 1328, the King of France, Charles IV, died without a male heir.
Just remember that these are all whitewashed bullshit images. Every single one of these kings, alright, that you see in these videos that I show you, including Joan of Arc herself, was Israelite, so-called black. Alright, in this period of time, whites lived very separately from us, and they lived really in a very low condition. Alright, they lived in the woods, they lived in barns and stables, and they had their own monarchies, but their monarchies was like, you know, I mean, the leaders of their people would be in a barn and a stable. They were just like how we are in the ghettos and the slums and the poorest housing. That's how whites were in this period of time. Okay? All right, let's keep going.
That might sound like a minor issue, but in medieval Europe, succession was everything. Without a clear heir, chaos would spread like wildfire. Charles had a sister, Isabella, known as the She-Wolf of France, and she had a son, Edward III, the King of England. Isabella argued that her son had a right to the French throne through her. But the French nobility weren't about to hand over the crown to a king who lived across the English Channel. They pointed to an old rule, Salic law, which said no woman could pass down a claim to the French throne. So instead, the French crowned Charles's cousin, Philip VI. Edward wasn't happy. At first, he accepted Philip's rule, but when Philip started seizing land from the English nobles in France, tensions boiled over. In 1337, Edward asserted his claim to the French throne and the 100 Years' War began. But here's the twist. The war wasn't really about honor or justice. It was about land, lots of it. At the time, English kings controlled vast territories in France, including places like Aquitaine and Gascony. These lands had been passed down through generations of royal marriages. But as nationalism rose, France wanted them back. England, meanwhile, wanted more. So began a war that would drag on, not for 100 years, but for 116. What many don't realize is that this wasn't a constant battle. The war had distinct phases, punctuated by truces, alliances, and uneasy peace. There were long breaks, some lasting decades. In between were plagues, revolutions, and shifting loyalties that changed everything.
And one of those plagues was the Black Death. All right. And this plague, the Black Death, decimated our population. All right. The Black Death. Okay. So during this 100 Years' War, all right, there was a pause in this war. And one of the pauses was this pandemic. And this pandemic, the Black Death, it was devastating, you know, because it started in what, 1348? Alright, here it says here in Wikipedia, the Black Death was a plague, a pandemic that occurred in Europe from 1346 to 1353. Alright, it was one of the most fatal pandemics in human history. As many as 50 million. Alright, let's keep reading. As many as 50 million people died. Perhaps 50% of Europe's 14th century population. And that's how devastating this was. So, you know, this war was going on between the Israelites in France and England over the throne. But then this plague happened for 7 years and decimated the population. So there was, you know, a pause in that war. And then afterwards, when the war subsided, you know, they started fighting again. Okay. So just to give you a context. Okay. Let's continue.
One of the first major English victories came in 1346 at the Battle of Crécy. It was a disaster for the French. French knights, weighed down in armor, charged recklessly. English longbowmen, using a relatively new weapon, decimated them from a distance. It was brutal, swift, and shocking. The longbow, with its deadly range and power, gave common English archers the ability to kill heavily armored French nobility from hundreds of feet away. Suddenly, a peasant could take down a knight. That wasn't just a tactical shift, it was a cultural earthquake. In fact, studies of mass graves from the Battle of Visby, contemporaneous, show how arrows pierced through bone and armor alike. Manchester Museum, 2002. War was changing, and so was who got to fight it. But victories didn't mean stability. In 1348, the Black Death swept across Europe, killing nearly half the population. Armies shrank, fields went unharvested. For a while, war paused as death claimed the land itself. Yet when both sides recovered, they came back fiercer. By the 1360s, the English controlled large parts of western France. It seemed like they might actually win. But France struck back under the leadership of Charles V, who slowly reclaimed territory. By 1380, the tide had turned. Still, no side could hold power for long. And as war dragged on, something else began to shift. People started to see themselves not as subjects of a king, but as English or French. The seeds of national identity were being planted.
Okay, so that's the background to that 100 Years' War, all right? And that national identity that they spoke about was very important when it comes to Joan of Arc, all right? Now, the last one I did was about Edward of Woodstock, right? All right, which this is a fake whitewash picture of him, but he was Jake, he was an Israelite. And why do you think he was called the Black Prince? All right, and people called him that after his death. Okay. Edward of Woodstock, June 15th, 1330 to June 8th, 1376. All right, he was involved. He was involved in this war. All right, he was involved in this war, and he was a knight. All right, and as I said, I did. Hang on, let me see here. I could show it to you. All right, I did a lesson on this. Let's see. I did a lesson on this. Let's see here. A while ago. There you go. This was it. Okay. Yeah, this is the lesson I did on it. Israelite lessons. Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince. All right, and he was a Jake. Okay, he wasn't a so-called white person. All right. Okay. And he was involved in this 100-Year War. Okay. I'm just gonna play this a little bit for you.
More famously, the Black Prince. His name once thundered through the courts and battlefields of medieval Europe, feared by his enemies and revered by his allies. But who was this legendary figure? And why does history gloss over a crucial part of his identity? He was a son of kings, a master of war, and by many accounts England's greatest martial mind. Yet, obscured behind the veils of time lingers a perplexing detail, repeated descriptions of him as black, swarthy, and dark-complexioned. Was this merely poetic embellishment, or a historical truth deliberately erased?
So there you go. He was described as swarthy. All right, and the same with Joan of Arc. She was described as swarthy as well. All right, so they've just lied about everything. You know what I mean? Because their history is shameful. Genocides, wiping out people. The only what's it called? The only people that have dropped any nuclear weapons is them. You know. So who really represents death? They do. All right. They don't represent life. They represent death. And this period of time, all right, the Middle Ages is prophesied in the Bible. All right, I'm gonna break this down. This is in Revelations 20 verse 1. All right, and look at the heading here: Satan bound. All right, Satan bound, because we know who the devil is, but who is Satan? Satan is where they get their power from. Okay, and the word devil means deceiver. And like I've showed you, they've deceived people about this period of time. And this period of time, the biggest institution was the church. And we all know that they don't really believe in God like how we do. All right, so Revelations 20 and 1, and I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. Now, the bottomless pit is a metaphor for Europe, because in Europe, it doesn't matter how much you dig, go further down into the ground, there's not a lot of natural resources. All right, there's not. There's not a lot of oil in Europe. There's not a lot of copper, zinc, carbon. And this is why all the European countries had to do colonialism. They had to go around to different countries to steal their resources, because Europe doesn't have many natural resources. Okay? All right? So, key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And what do you use a chain for? You know, like if you have a bike, you use the chain to, put your bike on the post and chain it up so no one can take it away. So a chain is to bind something, all right? And laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, all right? And bound him 1,000 years, all right? So the so-called white man, all right, who is the devil, and the word devil just simply means deceiver, all right? And he gets his power from who? Satan, all right? And Satan means what? Adversary, all right? Everything, this is why this society that they're running, they are promoting everything that the Bible says not to do, okay? So it's nothing bad or oh, this is discrimination. This is just facts, you know? And bound him 1,000 years. Because when you look at the Roman Empire, okay, the Roman Empire was their empire, but at the end of the Roman Empire, who were the emperors? Septimius Severus. Who was he? He was from North Africa. All right, Constantine, the so-called Great. Another Israelite Roman emperor, and so forth. Diocletian. All right, another Israelite Roman emperor, because the Roman Empire, just like America, was a melting pot of people. All right, it conquered vast territories. All right, and if you are a Roman citizen, you could travel from one place to another, and that is just like how it is now, or when you had the colonial era. All right, where people in Australia could come to England for free. They could travel because they were a subject of the British Empire. That's how Rome was. Rome was a multicultural society, and when you watch documentaries on YouTube, it tells you that, man. Okay, and laid over the dragon, the old serpent, the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. So are you telling me that the Roman Empire was went on for almost 1,000 years, roughly, all right, and that was a Edomite white empire, and then all of a sudden it collapsed, and then out of it came the Holy Roman Empire, and that was whites just having a total change of heart and saying, okay, look, we're not going to have banquets no more, because they used to have banquets. All right, the top people in Rome used to have banquets, and the people that would wait on them were naked men. So hang on, are you telling me that in that society they worshipped multiple gods? All of a sudden they had a change of heart and worshipped one god, and that was whites in the Middle Ages, who were the knights. Remember the stories that you see even in the TV shows like Joan of Arc or whatever. The church, even when wars were going on, the Roman Catholic Church, the priests would come, all right, and pray with the soldiers. Okay, in the Middle Ages they believed in a monotheistic God, a one God. That doesn't sound like them. But hang on, the Roman Empire, they worshipped. They had something called a pantheon, where the pantheon was to worship multiple different gods. You know, don't make sense because it's a lie. Okay, okay. The Middle Ages was not your empire. Okay, verse 3, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him. All right, and what does that mean? Meaning that Israelites took over Europe. All right, because remember in Rome, they, when the Roman Empire was weaker, all right, you had people called barbarians and so forth, barbarian hordes, and they were warring against Rome. Okay, many of those people that were called barbarians were Israelites that were living in Europe. Okay, those were derogatory terms. Okay, and set a seal upon him that he should, and this is the main point, that he should deceive the nations no more. Okay, so the so-called white man could not deceive the nations no more because he fell out of power and we came into power. All right, until the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. All right, so you had the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. All right, push it forward to 1,000 years. That's the 1300s. Okay, and that's when we had the Black Plague. So the Black Plague was the Heavenly Father's way of saying your empire now is coming to an end. Okay, so our empire basically started to go down from the time of the Black Death all the way up into the 1700s, which whites called the Renaissance period, which means rebirth. That was them coming back into power. Okay, until 1,000 years be fulfilled, and after that he must be loose a little season. So now that little season, he is loose. All right, so this from Revelations 20 verse 1 to 3, that is talking about us ruling Europe. Okay, and we enter the this mad woman, Joan of Arc. All right, but let me just play this because this says it's a good video and it's a good channel. It's called the Swarthy channel. All right, unveiling Europe's Swarthy kings, the forgotten reign. All right, let's play this.
Europe, centuries ago, a time of knights, castles, and kings. But wait, what if I told you that some of the most powerful rulers of this era were not the pale, bearded figures we often envision? Welcome to the Forgotten Reign, unveiling Europe's swarthy kings. These kings had dark complexions, a stark contrast to the conventional portrayal of European royalty. From Charles the Bold of Burgundy, known for his swarthy skin and fiery temper, to the Black Prince Edward of Woodstock, their influence was far-reaching and profound. These kings shaped Europe's history, yet are seldom mentioned in the traditional narrative. Their stories, filled with power, intrigue, and drama, deserve to be told. Unearth the hidden history, discover the truth behind the throne. Join us in unveiling Europe's swarthy kings. Remember, history is not always as it seems. Be intrigued, be inspired, be enlightened. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring.